Guys, we're going to have a great episode today. We're going to talk a lot about Zeiss. We're going to answer a bunch of listeners' questions. On the way over here, I got a question from a listener, and he was basically saying that the December Coues deer hunt starts for him tomorrow. And I know there's a lot of guys that listen that the Coues deer seasons are kicking off. You know, we've had the October seasons, the November, the early December seasons. Now we're kind of in that late hunt period where, you know, people call it the rut hunt. You know, I argue that, you know, typically the deer don't rut till later after Christmas and definitely rut a lot in January. But he asked, you know, basically, do you have any last minute tips for me? And so I sent him a couple messages. On those situations, I like to kind of just press the button and actually talk to the person. So he, you know, gets to hear my voice, gets to hear the inflection, and tried to point out some things on field judging, tried to point out some things on tactics. But I thought I would just go ahead and say it here and then let you guys kind of weigh in. You guys are both avid Coues deer hunters. You know, I think one of the things to answer the question is I think a lot of guys go out early and they go hard for the first week, maybe 10 days. And that's great. And a lot of great bucks get killed in that time frame. Mm-hmm. But I also see a lot of guys go out early and they go so hard that they burn up all their vacation time. They burn up their time with their wife of, you know, honeydew time. And then when the hunting gets really, really good after Christmas, it seems that there's Christmas obligations, New Year's obligations, all those sorts of things, but they've kind of burned their time early. Mm-hmm. So I try and tell people to go the first couple days, get a feel for it. You know, if you don't have the time to hunt the whole period, mm-hmm. to kind of strategize on when is the most effective time. Granted, I think the first couple days could be great. You could catch those bucks that have had a little bit of a break from, you know, some of the other seasons.
Yep.
But then I think it's important that you focus on when those deer are going to be most out in the open, most potentially chasing does. And I think we would all agree the beauty of these late December hunts are that late that activity in that late period of time.
Yep.
So that was one of the things I pointed out. And the other thing was, as that hunt progresses, there's a transition where all of a sudden, just one day you wake up and there's deer just really all over the hillsides. They're a lot more visible. Bucks are chasing does almost like a flip of a switch. The other thing is, like, sometimes I've seen it where you can bounce around in different pockets. Yep. You know, one of the nice things I like about some of the 22s, 23s, 21s, 6As, some of those types of units, you can hit on the highways or the freeways and be from, you know, you can be 25 miles away and maybe hit a pocket that's rutting and then pop down and there's nothing going on, so you pop back up to where they're rutting.
Yep.
In southern Arizona, I don't see that quite as much where they get pockety like that, but if you guys are listening and you have a unit where you can access different parts of the unit and just see what's shaking, see what's going on, and kind of monitor their behavior, that might put you on a pocket where the deer are going to be rutting.
My thing when you said that, like just in the very beginning, is big views. I want to take in as much country as possible and get the biggest look I can get and look for the pockets of does, because that's going to dictate, like, you know, what's going on over there versus what's going on. It could be ridge to ridge, let alone, you know, 25 miles away. So I think it's literally being able to, you know, don't put all your, unless you've got like a really big buck located and you've seen them.
Or you have an area that you specifically want to hunt the whole time.
That's a whole different deal. I get it. But if you're just out and you haven't had the time to scout, I'm looking for big views, and put the glass out and let it walk and let it, let's just see what's going on.
And don't
just take the temperature.
And don't get discouraged when you're seeing those does, because especially on this December hunt, you see those does the first week. There may not be any bucks around, but like Jay was saying, flip of a switch.
Yep.
There could be 5 bucks chasing the same 4 or 5 does in a week.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there, Cortland. Like, seeing does, you feel like, well, shoot, there's just 5 does. There's nothing going on. But literally, you could come back in 7 days or 10 days, and there's, like you said, 5 bucks chasing one doe.
All it takes is that one hot doe to bring those bucks in. So.
Right. And focusing too on these early days, like where are the doe groups? What's going on the hillsides? What's their behavior? Are small bucks nosing around and with does? That might give me an indication that, hey, that little 75-inch buck is really nosing that doe.
Yeah.
It's very possible that maybe a big buck might be there the next day. So I like to do kind of like what Cody was saying, like kind of just spot checking, just seeing what's shaking.
Yep.
But then as the hunt progresses, and from Christmas to New Year's, if you can really focus on that time frame, you have a really good chance that you're going to find some mature deer literally nosing and chasing does.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too, Jay, it's such a. First of all, it's my favorite time of year. It's my favorite time to be out glassing from, basically December on through, into the February. But like when the hunt starts, because you got bow hunters starting tomorrow and a bunch of units, and you got the rifle, the late rifle deer tags, and I think you got to hunt when you can hunt. And I was talking to Rob Vanderkoy yesterday. His son's got the tag in a unit, Central Arizona, and so we were talking about it, and they're like, well, we only have a certain amount of days, and it's all spread out, and I would rather have that than take all the days and just put them at the end and then get snowed out or weathered out. So
or fogged out.
Yeah, or fogged out, so there's a lot of ambiguity to sometimes what you're doing, but yeah, I would always take the later days if it's going to be good weather. And I tell you what else that I think we were talking about before we actually started today. The moon, the brightest full moon is like over the next 3 days,
right?
And look, at the time of the rut, anything can happen, and I think the deer are going to be more active. Period, but the moon is going to be. I woke up at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock this morning, and I looked outside. I'm like, I didn't need a flashlight. I could see everything going on. So,
well, and to add to that too, there's some people that don't really buy into the moon. They don't buy into the moon phases. I'm going to tell you that I'm 100% belief that if you're hunting Coues deer in a full moon, you're going to struggle. Now, one of the things that if you are hunting during a full moon, in my opinion, the first hour or two of light is slow. But sometimes around 9:30, all of a sudden the deer that they've been up between 2 in the morning and 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, then they lay down when the sun is coming up and they lay there for a couple hours. Make sure you guys, during these full moon periods, especially when it's colder outside, make sure you're glassing from 9 to 2 or 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then also expect the last hour or two to not be prime time.
Exactly.
I see prime time when there's a full moon. I see it being from 9 to 3.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we actually experienced that on my November hunt this year. We had the full moon. It was 100% full the second day of the hunt. I shot my buck the first afternoon. But we were watching deer stand up and rotate in their bed and lay back down at 6:30 to 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
And we saw more bucks between 10 and 2 than we did any other time of day.
That's
Yeah.
textbook.
Yep.
That's it.
A couple other tips that I gave this gentleman too from a field judging perspective, and I'd like to get you guys to weigh in on it, is, these late December hunts historically are periods of time when guys are seeing better bucks in general. I think a lot of it is the temperature and it's cooler and they just happen to be up more.
Yeah, they're more visible. Yeah.
And I don't think they're buried in the brush quite as much. But from a field judging perspective, I always like to tell guys on Coues deer, point length is everything. So when you take the percentage of score over the history of bucks, the bucks that have the longest points score more.
Yep, I
The
agree.
next category is the main beams. So on the main beams, you want those beams to go out away from their head and to go, get as much length and wrap around as possible. When you're looking at a buck head on, you want those beams to wrap around, and then you want them to tip up if possible, tip down. But if they can come within an inch or two, you've got, an 18-inch main beam, so you've got 36 inches right there. The other thing is, back to point length, like every point needs to look long in order for a buck to score really high. So there's those bucks that are wide, and then, but the points are short. And they're only a 3-point, but a short eye guard, short G2, short G3, but it's wide. Well, width is the last bit of consideration when it comes to scoring credit as far as percentage of total score.
Yeah.
Like, I would rather have a buck that's 11 inches wide, but his points are, he goes 4, he goes 9, and he goes 8
Absolutely.
on his G2 and G3.
Absolutely.
And, a good rule of thumb is you want 7+ G2s, you want 7+ G3s, to get you in that 100+ category. And the only other thing I'll add, and I'll let you guys jump in, is most every single buck over 100 inches, when you are looking at binos, and I would even argue no matter how far of a distance, once they get 100 and above, they look pretty big.
Yeah, they
do.
They have that boxy, brackety kind of
that frame look. You
look.
can just see that.
Well, when you get that much antler too on a deer's head, that's not realistically is not very big. It definitely makes them stand out, especially if you got 2 or 3 bucks together.
Yeah, and body size is everything. But and we're going to be talking about Zeiss optics here, and having good optics and the ability to be like, wow, that's a big frame, and he's got long points, and look at his beams. I mean, that's where you're getting into bucks that are 100+ category.
Try to get as many angles on them as possible.
And with that being said, if you get angles and you're like, he doesn't look that good, normally like 100-inch plus bucks, they look pretty good no matter what angle.
Absolutely. And they always look big walking away too. So.
Well, I was going to say that was my next thing was that the toughest angle to judge, or I think people get overexcited when they walk away from you.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, look how wide!" And
I think that goes with every
well,
animal.
and they do,
Right,
and it's kind of funny, because a lot of times especially if they're jumped or running away from you or doing, they'll pin their ears back and everything looks wide when they do that. So
I keep saying one more thing. I get all fired up about this, but the other thing that I told the gentleman, especially on these December hunts, is glass with binos on a tripod. Sit and use the sun in the morning as your advantage. So a lot of times you're looking at east-facing slopes. The sun's at your back. You're looking with the sun blowing the hill up, glowing the hill, if you will. The deer are going to pop. But then as the day transitions, and obviously a lot of it depends on temperature, but as the day transitions, those deer will start seeking the shade pockets. And so an afternoon glassing session, you're going to see more deer if you can glass into the shaded pockets, because that's where the does, and that's certainly where the bucks are going to be trying to get out of the heat of the sun.
Absolutely.
Well, it's funny that you say it, because I was just looking, Jay. I looked at the weather where I'm going to be, and there's a 12-degree difference in the sunrise temperature, and so I think a lot of times too, if you should be in position, you should be glassing, in that twilight up to the sunrise, but really use that sun, because those deer will stand up and they will take every bit of warmth they can get.
Yep.
And they will absolutely stand there. And I've actually watched them stand up, get in the sun, get that, kind of shake off and do their thing, and stay heated, and they'll lay right back down in the same spot and just sun there until they feel like it's, it's time to go or move or stay there. But it's, where I'm going to be, it's going to be 28 degrees on Monday, and it's 40 degrees on Friday. So it's a big difference in temps.
Yeah, and I think Coues deer are a lot like bighorn sheep as well. They have very thin hides, thin skin, and I think they conserve energy better by actually laying. And I notice this in Mexico a lot when I'm down there in the month of January on those really, really cold mornings where we may get in the low 20s, even sometimes the teens. Like for the first couple hours, the deer, they're just going to be bedded.
Yeah.
They can conserve more energy and stay warmer by actually laying.
Yeah.
Whereas I hear a lot of the Midwest whitetail hunters and back east where they say, cold morning, those deer are on their feet. Well, our deer being thin-skinned, I see them laying in the sun. They'll get up, they'll go over, and they'll just lay so the sun is hitting them, and they may lay there for 2 hours.
Yeah, or all day, depending on how cool it is that day.
Yeah.
And if you have a little bit of wind, we found a more late in the season, you tend to get a little bit more weather that moves in, especially end of December, right around Christmas. And we've seen a lot of those bucks literally laid out in the sun all day if there's a decent wind going, because I think they're conserving their energy, but they're also gaining as much heat as they can. So it's definitely they've definitely got a different attitude about things.
I think one other thing to hit on the on the late deer season, there's people that say that killing a big buck and patterning a big buck and I think patterning is probably the key word, but finding a big buck like in the early seasons or like the youth hunt or whatnot in October, when the rut starts to come on and the later you get, if the big buck that you found or you had on camera or whatever, and he's not around, you've got to broaden your view. Whether you got to move to another side of the ridge or bigger, I just would flat out tell people if he's not where you normally see him, it's just the time of year. They're more active. They're moving more. I think if you go back to the old reports of the Game and Fish and the studies they did, I think their area like quadruples.
Yeah, during this time period, like mid-December through the end of January, bucks can go just completely AWOL. The converse of that, though, is I think sometimes people have photos of a buck or they've seen a buck scouting and then they just go, I didn't see him, he's not there.
Yeah.
I would argue until you've exhausted every single angle and you've made sure that buck's not there, that then you broaden your search and continue looking.
Exactly.
I think that Richard Ockenfeld study that you're talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the Ockenfeld.
He shows like the 15th through the end of January, sometimes those bucks can go like 5 miles.
Yep.
And 5 miles in Coues deer country, as you know, is incredible. But the flip side of that, though, is too, you might be glassing a basin and haven't seen anything. All of a sudden, a buck comes walking into your life that you're like, oh, I love you.
Well, there's, and I think it's been proven time and time again. How many guys do you know that have sat in the same spot and they're not seeing the deer, and all of a sudden, 4 days later, the deer just appears out of, if it's in the late season, I'm telling you, that deer was working his, scrape lines or whatever he's doing, but he's looking for does, and he just happened to cycle back through.
Yeah, and
so
we call it run and gun in the late season. Cover as much ground as you can and hit those pockets like Jay was talking about, because you just never know where those deer are going to pop up again if you do lose a buck that you've been watching.
For sure, guys. Thanks for answering those Coues deer questions. I hope some guys get some value.
Well, good luck
out
to
of
all
that.
of them, because it's
a great time of year.
Just my favorite time of year for sure.
Absolutely love it.
Let's dive into some of these questions.